Good evening, everybody. A warm welcome to the first discussion of this conversation series powered by the collaboration between the Geneva Challenge and the Right Livelihood Foundation. Today, we have the pleasure to discuss with Monika Hauser, Right Livelihood Award Laureate of 2008. My name is Mia Schöb. I'm a PhD candidate at the Gender Center of the Graduate Institute, and I'm really honored to moderate discussion today. Thank you to all the participants of the Geneva Challenge for showing enthusiasm and participating in this contest, despite the challenges of the pandemic. We are thrilled to announce that we have 269 confirmed teams with 1,094 participants from across the world who will be working on ideas to solve the real-world problems. For those who don't know about the Geneva Challenge, it is hosted by the Graduate Institute of International Development Studies in Geneva, a project funded by Swiss Ambassador Diana Stellin, and it aims to encourage interdisciplinary problem-solving analysis among master students on advancing human development goals within the scope of a relevant topic. This year, students are invited to develop analysis-based proposals on the challenges of crisis management. The Right Livelihood Award by the Foundation was established to honor and support courageous laureates solving global problems. It honors the laureates who work with their specific projects and organizations to promote scientific research, education, public understanding, and practical activities that contribute to global ecological balance, are aimed at eliminating material and spiritual poverty, or contribute to lasting peace and justice in the world. The aim of this collaboration is to provide an exclusive opportunity to the participants of the Geneva Challenge to interact with the Right Livelihood Laureates and to engage in a discussion about the challenges and opportunities they have faced while working on different causes. The diverse voices and journeys of the laureates seek to inspire, motivate, and offer perspectives to the participants. We want this session to be interactive, and we invite you, the participants, to put your questions and comments in the Q&A box, which you can find at the right side of your screen. And please do so from now on. So whenever you have a question, just go ahead, post these, and so we can make this as interactive as possible. The event is being recorded and will be made available on the Facebook page of the Geneva Challenge. Now, I am sure many of you have already heard of Monika Hauser and her admirable work. Monika Hauser is a gynecologist by training who has worked with women and girls affected by conflict-related sexual violence for almost 3 decades now. Her impressive path starts with Medica Mondiale, pardon me, a women's health center she built up with a multi-ethnic team in the midst of the civil war in Bosnia in 1993. Out of this effort, she later founded a larger organization, Medica Mondiale, which works to prevent and punish sexual violence against women and girls in wartime and to assist the survivors. Monika and her colleagues have directly or indirectly helped over 100,000 traumatized women and girls in war and post-war conflict crisis zones in Bosnia and Herzegovina, Kosovo, the Democratic Republic of Congo, in Liberia and Afghanistan. In 2005, Medica Mondiale published Violence Against Women in War, a manual of lessons learned from 11 years of experience in half a dozen countries emerging from the war that I can highly recommend. Monika Hauser has received many awards for her outstanding work. Among others, in 2008, she was granted the Right Livelihood Foundation Award, also known as the Alternative Nobel Prize. In the coming hour, Monika will give us an insight into her work. I have some questions for her after she introduces us to her work, and then we open it up to the broader Q&A. But as I said, please write your questions as they come to your mind. Like that, I can also integrate them into the conversation. Now, without further ado, the floor is yours, Monika.
Thank you very much, Mia, and everybody who has organized this session tonight, and thank you very much, of course, for the invitation. I'm very eager and I like very much to tell you young people, students, master students, about what I think what is important for making really a substantial change in this world. And I want to speak in the beginning about 3 points. Let me start with the point of outrage and solidarity. I have reacted with a sense of outrage to discrimination and violence against women and girls all my life. Growing up, my Italian grandma told me about her experiences with sexual assaults in the context of the rural peasant society she lived in. And later on, I heard similar stories from several aunts who had gone through such experiences, and the perpetrators being family members or employers. Listening to these stories, I probably developed, let me say, sensors, and women felt that they could confide in me. And this continued to be so with my patients as a young doctor in my training as a gynecologist in German hospitals, and is still the case today when, for example, a high-ranking UN woman recently approached me in a conference and wanted to tell me her story. Working in hospital, in German hospitals, I realized that many of my patients had experienced violence and that their health conditions were closely related to that. And I also realized that there were no specialist approaches to match the requirements of these people, of these women, and to address their needs. So I saw that conventional medicine had a purely symptom-orientated view instead of also looking at the women's psychosocial situation. And I had to learn that many of my colleagues, female and male colleagues, did not really want to deal with this issue. There was a lot of ignorance. Many did not want to confront themselves with the painful consequences of patriarchal violence. But this violence is present in every patriarchal society, whether systemic in the, let me say, so-called peace societies like Germany, Switzerland, or the US. And I think #MeToo has shown in the last years what has actually been obvious for decades already before. And this violence is virulent at an even greater extent, of course, in war and conflict zones. So change can only be achieved if we address this issue, both by supporting and empowering the survivors and by changing the power structure so that violence can be reduced, that the traumatic consequences can be dealt with, and any society can become more gender sensitive and gender equitable. This outrage showed me the way to go in '93 as a young doctor to Bosnia when international media was full of the reports of the widespread and systematic rapes in Bosnia. And I knew it had something to do with me. And my solidarity with the Bosnian women brought me to this place. And in central Bosnia, together with 20 local professional women, I built the world's first therapy center for women in the midst of the war then. This was the beginning of today's internationally active women's rights organization, Medica Mondiale. And you see, it was this outrage at men who used women's bodies as a battlefield, and also at the international players who paid a lot of lip services, but did not show any intention to really act. It was this outrage that gave me the necessary energy to go to Bosnia without having a clear plan. But you know the question, did Columbus have a business plan? I for sure didn't. But it was this outrage that continues my work until today. And unfortunately, there are still, and again, many reasons for it. And this gave me the spirit to continue this very challenging work. And it is our outrage, let me say this very clearly, outrage at any injustices, which is our important compass guiding us into the direction we have to move. The world is full of blatant injustices. We have to utilize our privileges to undertake whatever we can do to change this, in whichever field this may be, by putting our education and our training, our skills, and our competencies to use. My second point is self-efficacy. Because the good news is that we can do all that what I just have spoken about. In my training as a gynecologist, I had learned little of what I would need later in Bosnia. I found that I had skills I hardly knew about before. I was able to motivate people to help build this women's center in the midst of the war. A construction company whose employees were looking for materials which we needed to convert a former kindergarten into a therapy center, what was a strange thing to do in the middle of the war. Conservative local politicians who let us apply the kind of medical and psychological approaches we thought to be the right one, including performing abortions. And I was able to motivate journalists who came and were willing to drop their sensationalized style for adequate, empathic reporting of the raped women, instead of writing sensationalistic stories about them. And female colleagues who thought their country was drowning in the muds of war, were drowning in the muds of war, and who then emerged out of their own depression to help our clients to come back to life. And back in Germany, I was able to convince private donors to support our work. And I can tell you, these are people who continue to support us till today, 28 years now. And realizing this high value, the effectiveness of my initiative, and seeing that hundreds of women regain strength and the courage to embrace life again, I began to see what I can achieve. Of course, this cannot be done alone. The right comrades have to be found. And then I can tell you, we really can move mountains. So don't really let any person, institution, or doctrine tell you what you want to do is impossible. And my third point is self-care. Really essential is taking care of yourself. I had neglected this at first and paid a high price for it. Ultimately, I had to learn that I can only do this work effectively in the long term when I take care of myself. This means also to self-reflect questions like, why do I always push my limits? Why don't I take better care of myself? Do I know myself? And this is the self-reflection, what is so important doing such a demanding work. And self-care also includes being clear about my own motivation. This is very important so that I don't misuse others for my needs or simply go beyond the needs and the limits of others. Whether I am fighting for human rights, for climate protection, for the development of societies, or in foreign policy, everywhere I am dealing with people who do not have my privileges. I have to be aware of the dynamics of power imbalances and therefore need to learn on the depth methods of how to work in a participatory way. The decisive factor is whether I have such an awareness and whether I approach others with empathy and curiosity. That is actually a basic principle, no matter whether I work in Berlin, Brooklyn, Tokyo, or Nairobi. And to come to an end of my short introduction, and I need to know that in certain circumstances and contexts, I'm often dealing with severely traumatized people. As a consequence, I need a certain expertise in order not to destabilize anybody, but to make people feel safe in my presence. And this is the foundation where good cooperation can thrive.
Thank you very much, Monika, for this insightful introduction into your work. I must say I personally loved your 3 points. They resonate a lot with my much more limited experience, and I am sure they've given a great roadmap to our participants for thinking their own projects right now and translating this and coming up with exciting questions. While they're doing so, I will make a start, and I would like to start with a question on feminism. Your organization is an explicitly feminist one, and in our conversations, you also underlined that it's a feminist standpoint that drives your motivations and actions as a professional. I hear a lot of words in your talk that tell me how deeply feminist your thinking is, but I would like to ask you to kindly expand a bit more for us on what it means to you to be feminist when working with survivors of conflict-related sexual violence specifically, and why you've chosen this path.
I think I'm a feminist since I am able to think about structures, to think about the world. And I told you about my grandma. So it was from very early, it was for me clear to work for women's rights. And I choose the specialization of a gynecologist because I thought there I can connect everything. The medical health situation of women, of traumatized women, the psychological part, and of course the political part. And from very young till today, I see that all these levels have to go together. And of course, you need a deep conviction in order to stay stable. When I look to all the resistances we have, not only in Afghanistan, of course, they are extreme, but we also have resistances against such attitudes and against such a kind of work in the middle of Europe. And I'm very happy that more and more we have feminist networks. We have young politicians who understand where to go and why it is so important. But we also need tools. We need technical tools in order to translate our philosophy, our visions into a technical way how to reach the goals. But I can tell you, if you only have the technical tools and not the feminist conviction, you will fail. But on the other side, you need these tools in order to have a clear strategic way how to go. And we are using in our work a strategic triad, which is reflected in the conceptual as well as in the daily work. And this is a multi-level approach. And in this multi-level approach, we look to the different levels in order to sensitize and to have synergies by that. That means we look to a structural basis, then we look on the level of community and institutions, and we look on the basis of individuals. And we always, in our analysis, in our concept, we try to have these levels in mind in order to develop the work after it. As a basic attitude, we see the systematic problem and not the purely individual problem of the individual women. I think this is really a basic attitude. Of course, each woman is one woman who has survived violence and discrimination, but only if we look at it on a systematic frame, we really can change structures. And I would like to show you the example of our psychosocial counseling. Empowering attitude means to see and to promote resources of a woman and not only doing technical counseling. And how counseling is done in particular is crucial with a social critical view, including the goal to establish the larger social political context. And for example, we are guiding solidarity groups among women, whether in Kosovo, Afghanistan, or Liberia, to guide such solidarity groups also with a feminist perspective. This means to be able to strengthen and support each other and against isolation as one of the main problems in patriarchal dynamics of women after experiences of sexualized violence is that they get isolated, and that method of blame the victim again gives the problem back to the individual women instead of knowing we are together, we all have these problems, and we only can empower ourselves in order not to speak about the big word of healing. But of course, this would be the last goal we have. But firsthand, to empower women means to overcome this isolation. This is already an interface to the family and community level, and means already in itself prevention work on social change processes. And self-efficacy for the individual women can be felt because women themselves can initiate something in their own community. So this is a clear explanation for how we can use the feminist concepts in order to look to all these levels in order to really make a sustainable change.
Thank you very much. That's very, very insightful, very hands-on. I think we can understand from your explanation quite well how to link the individual and the systemic in holistic approaches that try to take all the different important levels into account in order not to silence involuntarily or miss out on anything or anybody who could then re-trigger cycles of violence, if I may say. I would like to focus a bit more on the questions of sustainability and peace building in your work. The University of St. Gallen has awarded you for being socially transformative peace building in your work. And I think the reparations law in Bosnia, that is one of the outcomes of your projects there, is an excellent example of a very tangible outcome. So I would be very curious to hear a bit more about what the key elements are, according to your experience, that make your work sustainable and that enable you and your teams to make such peace-building contributions.
Okay. Key elements for sustainability are, again, first, this point, not to individualize the whole problem, because then I will fail to have a sustainable change. The social consequences of sexualized gender-based violence and the dynamics that drive women into isolation condemn them to silence, marginalize and stigmatize them instead of the perpetrators. And I need to know about these dynamics in a patriarchal society after experiences of sexualized violence in order to support women to come back in the middle of the society, maybe for the first time. So the word come back may be wrong. And therefore, sometimes we see this situation after war as an open window in order to make projects which perhaps for the first time start to sensitize society and start to empower women to go on their own way, even after having made such painful experiences. We carefully train our colleagues on the ground. In addition to technical knowledge, we accompany them in looking at their own internalized stereotypical images, as we should all do, just to say. To avoid falling again and again into patriarchal traps means I have to reflect this. For example, Kosovo colleagues, when we started after 2000 with the program there, they didn't want to work with women who were put in forced prostitution, because they said these are dirty women. And we tried to explain not these women who tried to save money, sometimes for 20, 30 family members at home. These women were forced into prostitution by mafia structures. And these men who are doing this forced prostitution, who are organizing it, they are dirty. For sure not the women who are victims themselves. And this is a long process to learn to consider their own structures, their own internalized pictures that women have to be like that and that. We are carefully always look at how we can strengthen also the colleagues, the local colleagues in this demanding work, because many of them have made own experiences of violence and could sit to their client and say, I have survived the same. So this is very important in order to paying attention to their own stability and strengthening bonds for the worldwide Medica Mondiale network all over the world. And to know that colleagues in another continent have similar problems and that we all have this feminist vision of changing structures and make a more gender-just society wherever, this is very bonding and very important also, and gives you inner strength. Then, of course, for sustainable work, we need to sensitize institutions, police, legal system, and especially health system. And we have worked out, we have elaborated specific programs in order to qualify local governmental health workers from health system, because we have seen that health workers are often key for accessibility for women for the health system. And they can make the big difference in accepting the woman and her story and to believe her and not to put their own patriarchal prejudice on her. Again, you are yourself guilty, what happened to you, and so on. So sensitize institutions and especially health systems is key for us. Sustainable work is also for us is very important to know about the effect of transgenerational trauma. This means trauma affects not only a single person, a mother or a father, but if they don't work through this trauma, and in war and post-war times, nearly nobody has the chance to work through. So this not work through trauma is transferred to the next generation. And we see this in all the contexts, and we know this from the German post-war society, that either human rights violations and also the guilt of perpetrators can produce severe trauma, long-standing trauma, what is transferred to the next generation. And then we see the effects on the next generations, but 2-3 generations later, nobody can connect that anymore with that what happened to your grandparents or your two parents. And therefore, it's important to have knowledge about this. And I'm very happy that more and more we have research in this field, what we can use. And we are starting and doing our own research. We have done this 6 years ago with our Bosnian colleagues in order really to evaluate the work and to speak with women 20 years later. And we have seen how deep this effects of the trauma, and especially trauma of sexualized violence, because of this patriarchal dynamics of stigma and taboo and isolation and silence, which deep effects all that has on the individual, and that how to say, your whole life is impregnated by that. And therefore it's so important to start with this trauma therapy, but also to look to the children. And I'm very convinced that where we do not look at that question, we have new violence, and we can see, unfortunately, in Bosnia, we can see in Kosovo, we can see in Afghanistan, in a very mere extent, dramatically terrible extent, how much this not worked through trauma goes on, and we have no new violence, new military cycles, and so on and so on. And women have to become visible and involved. We see in peace negotiations where women are not involved. And unfortunately, we have nearly no peace negotiations where women were sitting at the table. We see that the realities of female population does not appear. And we can see this, for example, with the Dayton Peace Agreement in Bosnia. The realities of the mass raped women and the severe consequences were not involved, and nobody spoke about that at the peace negotiations. And this, as it goes now for Syria, that we have so strong activists, we have so strong movements, but still the responsible international politicians are not doing enough to include the women at the table, and this is a really very, very big problem. And my last point to this is to make women visible. Think please of monuments and memorials when it comes to war. What is on these monuments in Germany? Nearly in front of each church we have this kind of monuments from Second World War, and on the monuments are the names of the soldiers, killed soldiers of a community. And this is not what we intend. We want that the life of women and the women victims also are visible, but also what women have achieved. And we need, therefore, a complete other concept of monuments, and not to have perpetrators on monuments, but to have visibility of women, whether they have been victims or whether they have taken action in order to change this, to make peace work. So this is very important, that this is also a feminist concept of a different kind of memorialization, and this is also something we are fighting for.
Thank you, Monika. What a big agenda. I hear inclusive approaches that take everybody on board, and not as traditionally the case in patriarchal societies, visibilizing and giving voice to men only, but ensuring meaningful participation of all and visibility of all who have been affected by conflict, if I may say. Now, this feminist approach that ties all your work across the globe together, if we come back to that, and I am just thinking about the challenges, negotiations, and the ethical dilemmas that I've encountered in my own fieldwork doing feminist ethnographies in Colombia in conflict-affected areas. Just makes me wonder, and maybe you could just very briefly share with us a story or two to understand where are the limits of this feminist approach? Have you ever encountered the limits, had to transgress the boundaries? And if yes, what does that look like? And what would be your good practices from that experience to deal with these situations, which can be very tricky and emotionally draining? And I may add maybe to this just a consideration from the audience. We have a question from one of our participants who asks about the harsh realities and experiences in the field. How do you keep yourself from being affected by the traumatic stories of the survivors, and how do you protect your own well-being? I know this is a broad range, but I think they tie in together. So I'm very curious to hear more about your experience in that regard.
To your question, we can see daily such limitations, dear Mia. And we have limitations first because of the local conditions. Let me go to Afghanistan. Our Afghan colleagues, in the beginning when we started to work there 20 years ago, they needed their family, the Afghan colleagues needed their family's permission for a business trip, for example. So we had to accept that a man, a so-called mahram, travels with them, with the colleague. And of course, we had to pay for his trip too. And we only could accept this for ourselves and implement it because we are always committed to social education and politically lobbying at the same time in order to fundamentally change this sort of tradition and behavior. So it means on the one side to accept the reality of women, because she couldn't have done this work if we not accept such a mahram, and on the other side to accept it only because we did daily sensitization work in society in order to explain why, of course, this has to stop one day to have such a mahram with you when you do a business trip. We had hardly any female accountants in the beginning of any project, because you find psychologists, gynecologists, social work, and so on. But to have female accountants and people who make financial controlling was very rare. So we had to find also here very creative ways, and we had to hire for some time a male accountant, but with the clear intention that he had to train at the same time a female colleague in order that she can take over in half a year, in 1 year, however, how much time it ever takes. But this was clear in his contract, that he only has the contract for the time being till he has trained her that she can overtake. So this are some 2 examples for a creative way how to go on with such problems. But as well, I want to tell you such hindrances on the international level. For example, a delegation of the UN Council was coming to Kabul in order to speak about UN Resolution 1325 with the network of Afghan civil society. And these people from the UN Council, they reminded the Afghan NGOs that they needed female leaders. Everyone had to laugh in this situation because the Afghan NGOs had much more women than the UN side. So this is one example, and let me tell you another one. A Danish diplomat, again in Afghanistan, said to my Afghan colleague, "It is in your culture that girls are married very early and forcibly." And her answer was, "That is not my culture. That is the culture of our men." But does your question or your sentence mean that you are on the side of our men? So sensitization is needed at every level, and surely this diplomat, he will never forget this answer. And my third example is Kosovo, a diverse Kosovo-Albanian women's group, what means Serbian and Albanian and Kosovarian women together, came to the UN chief negotiator for the Kosovo peace talks, Matti Ahtisaari, a later awardee of the Nobel Peace Prize, sorry. Matti Ahtisaari, and they asked him why he would only invite their men to the negotiations, and their men would only see black and white solutions, either that or that, but no compromises, no dialogue, no ideas in between. And they said that they, as a women group, are sitting together since some weeks to think about more creative solutions, to have better ideas for inclusive and sustainable peace. And they asked him, why don't you include us in our conversations, in your peace negotiations, but only our men? And his answer was, I did not want to disturb the culture of your country. So you see, to have important concepts like UN Resolution 1325 is one thing, but to have sensitized men in high positions wherever in the international community is the other thing, and therefore we have to perform something what Margot Wallström, the Swedish foreign minister, former minister, said: we need feminist foreign policy. And this is something what we try to push, and unfortunately in Germany we have some open ears for that, in the German government, but it's a long way, as we all know, to make steps forward. It's a long way. So therefore, sustainable work needs to work on all these levels.
Thank you, Monika.
And the question from the audience, sorry. Yes, this is, I try to make it short. As I said in the beginning, I paid a high price in Bosnia because I didn't look to myself. It was impossible in this situation there. And only later I went through situations which also traumatized myself. And my head was full of all these terrible stories and of my own experiences of shelling and so on. So I learned painfully over some time to look after myself, but I learned it, but it's a lifelong process, I think, because till today, I have situations where I realize it only very late, hopefully never too late, and this is maybe the progress, but to fill up my own batteries, to know why I have to have a private life and why I have the right for a private life. And that I have a big awareness for this to care for myself. I mean, this is the first step. And then I'm nourished, can I say, by my work also. And I have the privilege to know so many strong activists all over the world. And this is something what really is the salt in my soup, in my work, that we have such a strong bonding, working together, knowing wherever we are, we have our roles in Afghanistan, me in Germany, and we meet with our common visions. And this gives all of us and also me a lot of strength. But I'm also in the lucky situation that I have a husband who is supporting me since 30 years. Without him, I would say Medica Mondiale would not exist. He took over all the house management, the education for our son, so that I could build up this organization together with my colleagues wherever, and of course the colleagues in Cologne. So we need more men who take over their responsibilities at home in order to let their wives, their partners do such important work, and to share much more in such relationships where also capable women, which we have all over the world, can do their important activism.
Thank you very much. This is an empowering message. We have one participant who transmits you that she's really inspired by your optimism. And she asks whether you've seen change over the course of your work to keep you motivated in that way, in a feminist way, and to continue working for that feminist cause. We have 2 more questions after that, and about quarter an hour left. So maybe we could try to have 5 minutes per answer. And if there's any more questions, participants, please type them in now.
There is no reason to give up. And as a human rights activist, I say the glass is half full, however the situation is. Of course, there are desperate moments, no question. But then again, on the next day, something happens. What gives me new energy, and I am communicating. Of course, I like the most to be together wherever in this world. Since 1 year, we are working on this digital way and communicating. And fortunately, we have this digital way to communicate with our colleagues in Afghanistan, in Kosovo, in Congo, and in Liberia, and wherever. And then when a colleague in Goma is telling me about her different difficult challenging work, and she tells me about a very small success. Who am I not to see this small success and to say, yes, this is it. And we can make further plans, further strategic ideas to go on. And then I tell the next day a colleague in Kosovo who is very desperate about some some things in her country, I tell her what happened to the Congolese colleague. And then 2 weeks later, they both are communicating with each other, learning from each other, inspiring each other. I mean, I see so many advantages, so many progress, despite that wars are going on, despite that sexualized violence is going on in each war, and despite the hard fact that we cannot support everywhere. This is maybe also an answer to your second question, where I see the limitations. As a feminist, I want to support wherever, but I had to accept early, and this was one of my hardest piece of work, that we have to reduce, and that we cannot support everywhere, and we have to be very strategic where we put our resources in order not to can I say confluent, in order not to divide too much and not to be able then anymore to do effective work. So it's very important to be strategic. Nevertheless, situations are demanding everywhere. And being together with my colleagues in Cologne, with my colleagues wherever, gives me a lot of support and spirit. And there is no alternative to action, isn't it?
I'm just absolutely thrilled by your passion and the power of your discourse, Monika. One of the important messages that for me come out across all this discussion, across all your answers, is that awareness that if we deal with concepts like culture, as you mentioned a couple of times, we have to be aware that culture is made by those who have the power in a society, as memory is built by those who have the power of society, as public discourse will be shaped by those who have the power to shape it. So I have noted down culture equals made by men for me as a reminder, because at the very beginning of our session, one participant put in a question that I haven't had the chance to share with the broader audience here now. So I would like to read that out to you and just let you react on it. He writes, cheers from Brazil. Unfortunately, violence against women is present in most countries in the world. How much is that issue linked to culture, and how much is it connected to psychologically ill men, in your opinion? Thank you very much for this brilliant event. So I would like to leave the reaction to you, Monika, and then wrap up with one final question, unless we get more in the chat. Thank you.
Violence and discrimination of women is connected to patriarchal societies. And I pronounced it already before, whether in Germany or in Brazil or in Liberia. It means it's with this view, I don't look so much to the religion or to a specific culture of a context. I look to the patriarchal conditions. Of course, we are contextualizing our work also, and we have to see to specific situations, to the political situations and so on. But to be in short now for this answer, patriarchal conditions are the ground for these power imbalances, what we have spoken now about. And I'm warning to look to perpetrators as psychologically ill men. I'm warning, because I just recently have heard about the hospital. I have worked, a university hospital in the county here in Germany I'm living on, and also #MeToo is supporting people finally to announce what happened to them. And a female senior doctor has finally disclosed the time when she was raped and had to go through sexual assaults by a professor in this clinic. And okay, we can discuss whether he was psychologically ill, but I don't think that you who asked the question mean this kind of psychologically illness. So I really would warn, please do not look to it in this way. We see men as perpetrators in each religion, in each power situation, and #MeToo has supported us in seeing men like Dominic Strauss-Kahn and very powerful men where nobody would say they are psychologically ill, but they just misused their power situation they had and the power imbalances. And therefore, another discussion would be how many men as young boys have gone through own discrimination, through own humiliation. And all our societies have some violent parts. And of course, I don't say that young men and boys are not going through humiliation and even sexualized violence themselves. And this has, of course, consequences because it is such a big taboo in all our societies to speak about rape and sexual assaults against men and boys. But this is for me, again, an indicator of patriarchal structures, that men also rape men and boys, and boys have nearly no possibilities to go through and to heal. And of course, it is possible that later on they are, let me say, elaborating their own traumas in new violence cycles. This is what I said before about conflict zones. And again, we can see this also with individuals, that they are bringing up their own trauma in different kind of reactions. And women mostly are bringing these reactions more in a self-destructive way, and men bring it more to the outside in the form of new violence and so on. But I would not call them psychologically ill, at least not the most of them. I would not call psychologically ill. Therefore, please let us look in another way to this high amount of perpetrators. I think we can change it only if we look to that how it is.
Thank you very much, Monika. One of the participants remarked that women themselves are also implicated in the reproduction of patriarchy. I think this is a very important one, as we just mentioned. The discussion is not to essentialize and to put women on the victim side and men on the perpetrator side. If I understand you correctly, and as I understand patriarchy and see it reproduced in everyday lives, we're all implicated in this, within these gender dimensions of how it manifests in everyday life. And you've chosen to focus on women and girls as survivors of sexual violence specifically, which is not to deny that there's men and boys being victimized, and it's not to deny that women themselves have an important and essential role actually in reproducing the patriarchy that drives this kind of violence, if I may say. Now, I would like to wrap up with a very, very brief last question that's pragmatic and operational, thinking about the many projects that are right now in the making of this Geneva challenge. Is there a good practice, one good advice that you would have in terms of what questions do we have to ask according to your experience when we design a new project? Like, where do we start to ensure that what is growing from that mini project and expanding around that project will be feasible, but also relevant and sustainable? Because the holistic approaches that you are taking take decades to build up. So where do we start?
Mia, how many minutes for this question?
You have 2 minutes for a golden rule.
Difficult. So we don't design projects at the desk. We do so in cooperation with the colleague on site. Please never do it just designing, but go ahead with the colleagues and don't take the standards because they don't exist. apply a joint context and problem analysis following, for example, by a theory of change. Include your partners and take time enough for a planning situation. This is very, very important to have for this joint participatory process enough time. And for the feasibility, we use, for example, studies by independent consultants to have a comprehensive actor analysis. Again, this multi-level approach. And policy field analysis is very important to see the whole national and international legal frameworks which you could include. And the basis of our work is our standing of partnership. We work together with partners on a long-term basis, not quick impact, but on a long-term basis. And all our projects are embedded in our own regional and overall strategy, and synergies have to be used and created and to come together in order to create the sustainable impacts that they can be achieved.
Wow, there's little more to add on this. Thank you so much, Monika. I will take away personally from this event, besides all the absolutely engaging, fascinating examples that you've given us, for my own work, some messages from you. The first message that's come across very clearly is mobilize your outrage for changing not only the symptoms, what manifests, but for working together to change the structures, the systems beyond. So believe in social transformative solutions, even if they take time and energy. Believe in yourself, you can do more than you think you can. Take good care of yourself and of others. Be empathetic. Don't be discouraged by resistance, and partner up. The more knowledge, the more competencies, the more diverse, the better, and the more sustainable it will be. So these are my personal takeaways. I hope that the participants have taken away from this engaging discussion with you as many enriching points as I have to develop their projects. Some of them would like to get in touch with you, and I am sure that we're going to follow up with an email with your contact details and with some more information around your work and potentially useful links that you could share with them. So please bear with us. We're going to follow up on that with everybody who's been present here. And let me thank you enormously for taking the time and energy to be with us today. And of course, for 30 years of incredible work that has changed to the better the lives of many people, and that gives an example for young people to go for. That's very encouraging. So my sincere thanks to you for that, and it was just an absolute pleasure to share this space with you.
Thank you. It was my pleasure.
Thank you very much, Monika. Now, before we close, I just would like to announce that the next discussion event is on the 25th of May. You will have received by now an invitation with all the details. It's going to be at the same time like now, in the same format, and transmitted on the Facebook page of the Geneva Challenge. With that, I would like to thank you all. I wish you all a wonderful evening, a morning, afternoon, wherever you're connecting from. And I thank you for taking the time of being here with us and for having an interesting, curious, and very insightful conversation. Goodbye.
Bye.